She walked into the briefing room, and every head turned. Not in respect, in disbelief. "Who the hell let her in here?" The voice came from the back, loud, dismissive, laced with enough sarcasm to fill the entire hangar. Laughter rippled through the rows of Alpha Company Rangers, their camouflage uniforms still dusty from the morning's desert drill. 32 men, 1 woman, and she wasn't supposed to be there. Captain Jenna Caldwell didn't flinch. She kept walking, boots echoing against the concrete floor, her flight suit crisp despite the 110-degree Arizona heat outside. Her helmet bag hung from her shoulder. Her name tape read, Caldwell, U.S. Army, 160th SOAR, the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers, the most elite helicopter pilots in the world, and she was one of them. But these men didn't know that yet. Hey, this is a restricted briefing," someone shouted. A staff sergeant near the front row stood up, his arms crossed like a bouncer at a nightclub. "You lost, sweetheart? Admin's 2 buildings over?" More laughter. A few whistles. One guy nudged his buddy and muttered something under his breath. Caldwell caught the word cute and felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her face stone-cold neutral. She reached the front of the room and placed her bag on the table next to the mission map, a topographical layout of the Paktika province in Afghanistan, red circles marking LZs, enemy positions, and casualty zones. "I'm not lost," she said quietly, her voice calm but sharp as a blade. "I'm your pilot." Silence dropped like a bomb. Then someone laughed. Hard, like she'd just told the funniest joke of the year. "You? You're flying the Black Hawk?" The staff sergeant was grinning now, looking around for validation. "Yeah, right, and I'm Captain America." "Actually," Caldwell replied, her green eyes locking onto his, "I'm flying the MH-60M. And if you're ever bleeding out in the Hindu Kush with Taliban closing in, you'll be praying I show up." The grin faltered. She turned to the rest of the room. "My name is Captain Jenna Caldwell. I've logged over 1,200 combat flight hours across Iraq and Afghanistan. I've extracted Green Berets, SEALs, and Rangers under fire more times than most of you have been deployed. And tomorrow morning at 0400, I'm flying into a hot LZ to pull out 3 wounded operators, your brothers, who are currently pinned down by enemy combatants 30 clicks north of Fob Salerno." She let that sink in. "So if anyone has a problem with me being here," she added, her voice dropping to something colder, "you can take it up with Colonel Hastings, or you can sit down, shut up, and let me do my job so your boys come home alive." Nobody moved. Not at first. Then slowly 1 ranger in the 3rd row sat down, then another. The staff sergeant's face had gone red, but he dropped back into his seat without another word. Caldwell pulled the pointer from the table and turned to the map. Here's the situation. 2 years earlier, Fort Rucker, Alabama. Jenna Caldwell had always been told she didn't belong. Not by her family. Her father was a retired Apache pilot, her mother a trauma nurse. They believed in her. But the rest of the world? That was a different story. Women don't have the upper body strength for this. The guys won't respect you. You'll be a distraction. She'd heard it all through flight school. She'd heard it during her first deployment. She'd heard it when she applied to the 160th SOAR, the most selective aviation unit in the U.S. Military, where only 10% of applicants make it through selection. And she'd ignored every word. Because Jenna Caldwell didn't fly helicopters to prove a point. She flew because she was good. Better than good. She had instincts most pilots spent a decade trying to develop. Situational awareness, split-second decision-making, the ability to read terrain and weather like a book. Her instructors at Rucker called her a natural. Her classmates called her lucky. The truth was somewhere in between. But Jenna didn't care about labels. She cared about the mission, and the mission always was simple. Bring them home. Back to the briefing room. Present day. The extraction window is 6 minutes, Caldwell continued, tapping the map with the pointer. The terrain is rocky, elevation 7,000 feet, winds gusting to 35 knots. The LZ is 200 meters from the casualty site. Enemy forces are dug in along this ridgeline, here, here, and here. She circled 3 positions. Air support will suppress the ridgeline, but will still be taking fire on approach. Once we're on the ground, you have 90 seconds to load the wounded and get back in the bird. Any longer, and we're sitting ducks." One of the younger rangers raised his hand. "What if we can't make it in 90 seconds? Caldwell's eyes didn't waver. "Then I'll wait, but I won't leave without you." The room was quiet now. No jokes, no laughter. Just the hum of the air conditioning and the weight of what was coming. A major near the door spoke up. "Captain Caldwell, what's your evac plan if the bird takes critical damage?" "Auto-rotation to the nearest flat ground," she said without hesitation. "If the tail rotor's compromised, I can still control descent with collective and cyclic. If the engine fails completely, we glide. I've done it before." "Where?" "Helmand Province, 2019. Engine took an RPG fragment at 400 feet. Set her down in a poppy field. 0 casualties. Bird was flying again in 2 days." The major nodded slowly. "I read that report. That was you?" "Yes, sir." He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, studying her. Then he looked at the staff sergeant who'd been so loud earlier. "Sergeant Kozlowski, you got any more questions for the captain?" Kozlowski's jaw worked, but he said nothing. "Good," the major said. "Then let's move on to the rest of the brief." Later that night, barracks. Jenna sat on her bunk, cleaning her sidearm, a standard-issue M9 Beretta. The barracks were quiet except for the distant hum of a generator and the occasional shout from the rec room down the hall. Her phone buzzed. A text from her father. "How's it going, Firefly?" She smiled. He'd called her that since she was 6, the first time he'd taken her up in a Huey, and she'd pressed her face to the window, mesmerized by the lights below. She typed back. "Same as always, winning hearts and minds." "That bad, huh?" "They'll come around. They better. You're the best pilot I ever trained." "You're biased." "Damn right I am. Stay safe, kiddo." She set the phone down and went back to the gun, her hands moving on autopilot. She'd cleaned this weapon 1,000 times, but the ritual calmed her, focused her. Tomorrow she'd be flying into hell, and she'd do it with a smile. 0400 hours. Flight line. The Black Hawk sat under the floodlights like a sleeping predator. Matte black, bristling with sensors, fuel tanks, and door-mounted M240 machine guns. The rotors gleamed in the artificial glow. Jenna walked her pre-flight, checking every panel, every bolt, every hydraulic line. Her co-pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Mike Torres, was already in the cockpit running the startup checklist. "Coffee's in the cup holder," he called out. "You're a saint," Jenna said, climbing into the left seat. She strapped in, pulled on her helmet, and flipped the visor down. The HUD came alive with green data. Altitude, heading, fuel, weapon status. Torres glanced over. "You ready for this?" "Always. These guys are going to be watching you like hawks, you know. Let them watch." He grinned. "That's my captain." The crew chief, a wiry Texan named Diaz, gave the thumbs up from the cabin. "We're green, ma'am." Jenna keyed the radio. "Tower, Night Stalker 2-1, requesting clearance for departure. Night Stalker 2-1, you are cleared for departure. Godspeed." She pulled collective, and the Black Hawk lifted off the tarmac, smooth as silk. Behind her, loaded into the cabin, were 6 Rangers, including Sergeant Kozlowski. He sat near the door, rifle between his knees, staring at the back of her helmet. She didn't need to see his face to know what he was thinking. Let's see if she's really as good as she says. En route, 30 minutes out. The desert stretched below them, black and endless under the stars. The Black Hawk cut through the night at 140 knots, flying nap of the earth, low and fast, hugging the terrain to avoid radar. Jenna's hands were light on the controls, her eyes scanning the horizon, the instruments, the terrain. Torres handled comms, coordinating with the Apache gunships providing overwatch. 2-1, this is Hawk Lead. We have visual on the LZ. Hostiles confirmed on the ridgeline. We're going hot in 60 seconds. Copy that, Hawk Lead. We're 2 minutes out. Jenna adjusted course slightly, compensating for the crosswind. The Black Hawk responded instantly, dancing through the air like it was part of her. In the cabin, Kozlowski gripped his rifle tighter. He'd flown dozens of missions, but never with a female pilot. And despite everything she'd said in the briefing, a part of him still wondered, can she really do this? Then the radios exploded with chatter. Contact! Contact! We're taking fire! Heavy fire! Need immediate extraction! Jenna's voice cut through, calm and steady. Night Stalker 2-1 inbound! Hang tight! She pushed the cyclic forward, and the Black Hawk dove toward the mountains. The night turned orange. Tracer rounds arced across the sky like deadly fireflies, stitching patterns through the darkness. The ridgeline erupted in muzzle flashes as the Taliban fighters opened up with everything they had, AK-47s, PKM machine guns, RPGs, and Jenna Caldwell flew straight into it. 2-1, you are taking fire from multiple positions. The Apache pilot's voice crackled in her headset. Recommend abort and circle for another pass. Negative, Hawk Lead, Jenna replied, her voice eerily calm. We've got wounded on the ground. I'm going in. Torres shot her a look. Jenna, I said I'm going in. She banked hard left, dropping altitude, threading the Black Hawk between two rocky outcroppings. The helicopter shuddered as rounds punched through the tail section. Warning lights flashed red across the instrument panel. Tail rotor hit, Torres called out. We're losing hydraulic pressure. I got it, Jenna said, adjusting the pedals, compensating for the damaged rotor with pure muscle memory and instinct. The Black Hawk wobbled but held course. In the cabin, Kozlowski's knuckles were white on his rifle. The whole bird was shaking. He could hear the bullets hitting the fuselage. Thunk, 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 like hail on a tin roof. She's gonna get us all killed, he thought. Then she did something impossible. Jenna rolled the Black Hawk 30 degrees, slipping sideways through a gap barely wider than the rotor span, using the terrain as cover. Bullets whizzed past the windows. The ridgeline was so close Kozlowski could see the individual rocks. And then they were through. The LZ opened up ahead, a flat stretch of ground maybe 50 meters wide, surrounded by boulders. 3 figures lay near the center, one waving a strobe light. LZ in sight, Jenna announced. 30 seconds. She flared the helicopter, bleeding off speed, bringing the nose up. The Black Hawk shuddered, fighting her, the damaged tail rotor screaming in protest. Come on, baby, she whispered. Just a little more. The skids touched down. Go, go, go! Diaz screamed from the cabin, and the Rangers poured out, weapons up, forming a defensive perimeter. Kozlowski hit the ground running, his boots kicking up dust. He could see the wounded now. 2 Rangers and a Green Beret, all covered in blood, their uniforms shredded. One wasn't moving. Get them up, Kozlowski shouted, and his team moved like a machine, hauling the casualties toward the Black Hawk. The ridgeline lit up again. Rounds slammed into the ground around them, kicking up geysers of dirt. The door gunners on the Black Hawk opened up, their M240s roaring, sending streams of tracers back at the enemy. Kozlowski grabbed the Green Beret under the arms and dragged him toward the bird. The man was unconscious, his leg a mangled mess below the knee. We're not leaving him, Kozlowski grunted, hauling the soldier up the ramp. Everybody in, Diaz yelled. We're at 90 seconds. One of the wounded Rangers screamed as they lifted him into the cabin. Kozlowski jumped in last, slamming his fist against the bulkhead. We're up. Go. Jenna didn't wait for confirmation. She pulled collective and the Black Hawk lurched into the air. An RPG streaked past the cockpit, missing by inches. Jesus! Torres shouted. Jenna banked hard right, diving back toward the valley floor, using every trick she knew to make the Black Hawk a harder target. The helicopter was sluggish now, the damaged tail rotor fighting her every move. Hydraulics are failing, Torres called out, scanning the gauges. We're losing pressure fast. How long do we have? Maybe 5 minutes, maybe less. Then we fly fast. She pushed the Black Hawk to its limits, racing low over the desert, the rotors screaming, the engine temperature climbing into the red zone. In the cabin, Kozlowski was working on the Green Beret, his hands slick with blood. The man's pulse was weak. Too weak. Come on, buddy, Kozlowski muttered, pressing gauze against the shredded leg. Don't you die on me. Not after all that. The Black Hawk bucked hard and Kozlowski slammed into the bulkhead. He looked up at the cockpit at the back of Jenna's helmet. She's still flying. How the hell is she still flying? Fob Salerno. Emergency landing. Night Stalker. 2-1, this is Salerno Tower. We have emergency crews standing by. What's your status? Tail rotor is compromised, hydraulics failing, but we're still airborne. Jenna replied, her voice tight. We have 3 urgent surgical on board. I need a clear approach and every medic you've got. Copy that, 2-1. Runway is clear. You are cleared for emergency landing. Jenna could see the base now, a cluster of lights against the darkness. The Black Hawk was barely responding to her inputs. Every adjustment took twice the effort, twice the focus. Torres, when we land, I need you to cut the engine the second we touch down. No delay. Got it. She lined up with the runway, her hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. The Black Hawk wobbled, yawed left, and she corrected with the pedals, coaxing the dying bird toward the ground. 50 feet, Torres called out. 40, 30. The skids hit hard. Jenna killed the throttle, and Torres shut down the engine. The rotors wound down with a dying whine, and suddenly everything was silent, except for the ringing in their ears and the shouts of the medics rushing toward them. Jenna sat back, her hands shaking now, adrenaline draining away. Torres looked over at her. That was the craziest flying I've ever seen. She managed a weak smile. You say that every time. Because every time you top yourself. Debriefing. 2 hours later. Colonel Hastings stood at the front of the room, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The Rangers who'd been on the mission sat in the front rows, still in their dusty uniforms, exhaustion written across their faces. Jenna stood at attention beside her co-pilot, waiting. Captain Caldwell, Hastings said finally, your Black Hawk took 14 hits. The tail rotor is totaled. Hydraulics are shot. The engine is barely salvageable. Yes, sir. You flew into a hot LZ under heavy fire, extracted 3 critically wounded operators, and brought them home despite catastrophic damage to your aircraft. That was the mission, sir. Hastings studied her for a long moment. Then he turned to the Rangers. Sergeant Kozlowski, you were on that bird. You have anything to say? Kozlowski stood slowly. His uniform was still stained with the Green Beret's blood. He looked at Jenna, and for the first time there was no smirk, no sarcasm. Sir, he said quietly, she's the best pilot I've ever flown with. The room was silent. Permission to speak freely, sir? Kozlowski added. Granted. I owe her an apology. We all do. He looked around at his team. We judged her before she ever stepped into that cockpit. We assumed she couldn't do the job. We were wrong. He turned back to Jenna. Ma'am, if I ever need to be pulled out of hell again, I want you flying. Jenna's throat tightened, but she kept her face neutral. Thank you, Sergeant. Kozlowski saluted her. She returned it. And then, one by one, every Ranger in the room stood and saluted. Hastings let it go on for a moment, then nodded. Dismissed. As the room emptied, Hastings pulled Jenna aside. I'm recommending you for the Distinguished Flying Cross. What you did tonight, most pilots would have turned back. I couldn't do that, sir. Not with our guys on the ground. I know. He smiled faintly. That's why you're one of the best we have. Get some rest, Captain. You've earned it. 3 months later, flight line night. Jenna stood beside her new Black Hawk, fresh from the depot, fully repaired, better than new. She ran her hand along the fuselage, feeling the cool metal under her palm. Torres walked up beside her. You ready for tomorrow? Always. You know the new guys are going to be just as skeptical, right? She smiled. Let them be. They'll figure it out. You enjoy proving people wrong, don't you? No, Jenna said, looking up at the rotor blade silhouetted against the stars. I enjoy doing my job. If that proves people wrong, that's just a bonus. Torres chuckled. Well, for what it's worth, I'm glad you're my pilot. Same, Mike. Same. They stood there in comfortable silence, 2 soldiers under the night sky, ready for whatever came next. Because that's what they did. They flew into hell, and they brought their brothers home. Word travels fast in the military. By the time Captain Jenna Caldwell rotated back to Bagram after her second tour, she wasn't just another Night Stalker pilot. She was the Night Stalker pilot. The one who'd flown into Paktika with a shot-to-hell Black Hawk and brought everyone home. The one who'd landed a burning bird in a sandstorm to extract a SEAL team. The one who'd volunteered for missions other pilots called suicide runs. The one they now called Valkyrie. She didn't pick the call sign. Call signs never work that way. But it stuck. Valkyrie. The Norse warrior women who chose who lived and died in battle. Appropriate, maybe. She'd certainly made those choices more than once. But Jenna didn't think of herself as a legend. She thought of herself as tired. She sat in the ready room, nursing a lukewarm coffee, staring at the mission board. Another high-risk extraction, another team in trouble, another impossible situation. "You don't have to take this one," Torres said, dropping into the chair beside her. "Henderson can fly it." "Henderson's good, but you're better, I know." Torres sighed. "Jenna, you've flown 97 combat missions in 18 months. You're running on fumes." "I'm fine." "You're exhausted. There's a difference." She looked at him, and for just a moment, the mask slipped. The steel veneer she wore every day cracked just enough for him to see the weight she carried. "If I don't fly," she said quietly, "someone else has to. Someone who might not make it. Someone who might—" She stopped, shook her head. "I can't do that, Mike. I can't sit here knowing I could have made a difference." Torres was quiet for a long moment. "You know what your problem is? Enlighten me. You think you're responsible for everyone, every soldier, every mission, every life. But you're not. You're one pilot, Jenna. One person. And that person happens to be the best chance they've got." He couldn't argue with that. It was true, and they both knew it. "So what's the mission?" she asked, turning back to the board. Torres pulled out a tablet and brought up the brief. "Delta team inserted into the Korengal Valley 48 hours ago. They were tracking a high-value target, bomb maker responsible for at least a dozen IED attacks. Intel was solid. They moved in last night. Let me guess, it was a trap." "Yep. They're dug in on a ridgeline, taking fire from 3 sides. Air support is limited. Weather's closing in fast. They need extraction within the next 6 hours or they're not getting out at all." Jenna studied the map. The Korengal Valley. The Valley of Death. Some of the worst terrain in Afghanistan. Steep mountains, heavy vegetation, unpredictable winds. A nightmare for helicopter operations. "What's the weather looking like?" "Deteriorating. Storm front moving in from the northwest. Ceiling dropping. Visibility down to a quarter mile in spots. Wind gusts up to 40 knots. And they want us to fly into that. Nobody wants you to fly into that, but it's the only way those guys come home." Jenna drained her coffee and stood. "Then let's go get them." Torres followed her toward the flight line. "You're insane, you know that?" "So I've been told." The Korengal Valley, 1630 hours. The Black Hawk punched through the cloud layer and Jenna's stomach dropped. Not from the turbulence, she was used to that, but from what she saw below. The valley was a maze of ridges and gorges, the terrain so rugged it looked like someone had taken a giant knife and carved gashes into the earth. Trees clung to impossible slopes. Rivers cut through the bottom like veins of silver, and somewhere down there, 8 Delta operators were fighting for their lives. 2-1. "This is Raptor Lead," a voice crackled in her headset. "We have visual on your target. They're on the North Ridge, coordinates transmitting now. Be advised, enemy forces are in the trees below them. You'll be taking fire on approach." "Copy that, Raptor Lead. We're going in." She dropped altitude, the Black Hawk shuddering as it cut through the turbulent air. The visibility was awful, clouds and mist swirling around them, cutting their sight lines down to nothing. "This is crazy," Torres muttered, scanning the instruments. "We can barely see 50 meters ahead. Then we fly by instruments." "Jenna, Mike, I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" He looked at her, saw the focus in her eyes, and nodded. "Yeah, I trust you." "Good, because this is going to get rough." She wasn't kidding. The moment they descended into the valley, the wind hit them like a fist. The Black Hawk yawed hard left, and Jenna fought the controls, using every ounce of strength to keep the bird steady. 35-knot crosswind, Torres called out. "Gusting to 40! I got it!" She banked right, cutting through a gap between 2 ridge lines, the rotor tips missing the trees by meters. The Black Hawk screamed in protest, but she kept it under control, riding the turbulence like a surfer on a wave. In the cabin, Diaz was white-knuckled, gripping the doorframe. "Ma'am, if you're trying to give me a heart attack, it's working." "Hang on, Diaz, we're almost there." Ahead, she could see the ridge now, barely. Smoke and mist obscured most of it, but she caught flashes of movement, the glint of weapons, the strobing of muzzle flashes. "Raptor lead, this is 2-1. I need you to suppress that tree line. Light it up." "Copy that, 2-1. Guns hot." The Apache gunships dove, their chain guns roaring, chewing up the forest below. Trees exploded in splinters. The enemy fire slackened, just for a moment. Jenna seized the opportunity. She pulled the Black Hawk into a tight spiral, dropping altitude fast, using the terrain to shield them from the worst of the wind. Her hands moved over the controls like a concert pianist, every adjustment precise, every movement calculated. "LZ in sight," she called out. "Stand by." The ridgeline was barely wide enough for the Black Hawk to land, maybe 40 feet across, with a sheer drop on one side and a rock face on the other. And the wind was doing everything it could to push them off course. "Jenna, I don't think we can fit." "We'll fit." She flared the helicopter, killing their forward speed, bringing the nose up. The Black Hawk hovered for a moment, suspended in midair, fighting the wind, and then she set it down. The left skid touched first, then the right, and the Black Hawk settled onto the ridge like a bird landing on a tightrope. "We're down," Diaz shouted. 30 seconds. The Delta operators came out of the trees, moving fast despite their injuries. Jenna could see blood on their uniforms, exhaustion in their faces. They'd been fighting for 2 days straight. Come on, she whispered, watching the clock. 20 seconds. The enemy fire picked up again. Rounds pinged off the fuselage. 15 seconds. One of the Delta operators stumbled, and his teammate grabbed him, hauling him forward. 10 seconds. "Last man boarding," Diaz called out. Jenna was already pulling collective. The Black Hawk lifted off just as an RPG streaked through the space they'd occupied a second earlier. It slammed into the ridge and exploded, showering them with rock and debris. "Hold on!" Jenna shouted, banking hard left, diving back into the valley. The wind grabbed them, tried to throw them into the mountainside. Jenna fought it, her arms screaming with effort, sweat dripping into her eyes. "Climb! Climb!" Torres yelled. "I'm trying!" The Black Hawk's engine roared, straining against the altitude and the weight. They were too heavy, too slow, and the ridge was rushing up to meet them. Jenna made a split-second decision. She dumped the nose, trading altitude for speed, diving toward the ridge instead of away from it. "Jenna, what are you—" At the last possible moment, she pulled up, using the momentum to slingshot them over the ridge. The Black Hawk's belly cleared the rocks by inches, and then they were through, climbing into open sky. Torres let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. That was insane, I know. I was going to say brilliant. Jenna allowed herself a small smile. That too. Bagram Airfield, 2 hours later. The Delta team leader found her in the hangar inspecting the damage to her Black Hawk. His name was Major Garrett, and he looked like he'd been through a meat grinder. His face bruised, his arm in a sling, his uniform torn and blood-stained. "Captain Caldwell?" She turned. "Major." He studied her for a moment like he was trying to reconcile the person in front of him with the pilot who'd just pulled off the impossible. "I've been doing this for 15 years, he said finally. "I've flown with the best pilots in the world, SEALs, Rangers, Air Force PJs. And what you just did—" He shook his head. "I've never seen anything like it. Just doing my job, sir." "No." His voice was firm. "What you did was above and beyond. You could have turned back a dozen times. The weather, the terrain, the enemy fire, any one of those things should have been a no-go. But you kept flying. You kept fighting. And because of that, 8 men are going home to their families." Jenna felt her throat tighten. "Thank you, sir." Garrett extended his hand. "Thank you, Captain. I owe you my life. We all do." She shook his hand, and for the first time in months she felt something other than exhaustion. She felt pride. 1 week later, Pentagon briefing room, Washington, D.C. Jenna stood at attention in her dress uniform, her hands clasped behind her back, her eyes straight ahead. The room was full of brass, generals, colonels, civilians from the Department of Defense. And at the front, the Secretary of the Army held a small blue box. "Captain Jenna Caldwell," the secretary said, his voice echoing in the quiet room, "for extraordinary heroism in aerial flight during combat operations in Afghanistan. Despite catastrophic damage to her aircraft, severe weather conditions, and sustained enemy fire, Captain Caldwell repeatedly and willingly placed herself in extreme danger to extract wounded personnel from hostile territory. Her actions directly resulted in the survival of 11 soldiers and special operations personnel. Her courage, skill, and dedication to duty reflect great credit upon herself, the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, and the United States Army." He opened the box and lifted out the medal. The Distinguished Flying Cross, its bronze propeller blades gleaming under the lights. "It is my honor to present you with the Distinguished Flying Cross." He pinned the medal to her chest and the room erupted in applause. Jenna saluted, and the secretary returned it. As she walked off the stage, she caught sight of her father in the crowd, his eyes shining with tears. He mouthed 2 words, "I'm proud." She nodded and blinked back tears of her own. Epilogue, 6 months later. Jenna stood in front of a room full of young officer candidates at Fort Rucker, her old flight school. They stared at her with a mix of awe and nervousness. These kids who wanted to fly helicopters, who wanted to be like her. "Flying helicopters isn't about being fearless," she told them. "It's about being afraid and doing it anyway. It's about knowing that people are counting on you, and you can't let them down." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "Some of you are going to face challenges I never did. Some of you are going to be told you don't belong, that you're not good enough, that you should quit. But here's what I want you to remember. Your job isn't to prove them wrong. Your job is to be so good that they can't ignore you." A young woman in the front row raised her hand. "Ma'am, did you ever think about quitting?" Jenna smiled. "Every day. But then I'd remember why I started flying in the first place. Not to be a hero, not to make history, but to bring people home. And as long as there are soldiers who need to come home, I'll keep flying." The room was silent. "So will I ever quit?" Jenna continued. "Not as long as I can still hold a cyclic. Not as long as there's a mission. Not as long as there are people worth fighting for." She looked at the young woman who'd asked the question, "And neither should you." Final scene. Flight line, sunset. Jenna walked out to her Black Hawk, the sky painted orange and gold. Torres was already there, running pre-flight. "Another mission?" he asked. "Always another mission." She climbed into the cockpit, strapped in, and pulled on her helmet. The rotors began to turn, slowly at first, then faster, until they were a blur against the sky. And as the Black Hawk lifted off, Jenna looked out over the base, the mountains, the endless horizon. This was her life. This was her purpose, to fly, to fight, to bring them home.